Do you ever find it really hard to stay focused on a task and find yourself distracted and going from one thing to the next? Sometimes it's what you would consider productive work. Maybe it's emails and Slacks and things you got to do, but you just can't quite focus in on one thing. Maybe it's a little less productive. Maybe you get on YouTube or Instagram and you just stay there a little too long. Well, I feel like a lot of people actually, they have this problem and they're looking for a solution, including myself. And I stumbled across this really interesting and unique approach to tackling this focus problem. And I actually covered it in a newsletter when I used to actually do a newsletter. If you want me to continue doing a newsletter, let me know in the comments. I might actually revive that thing. But I talked about this method called interstitial journaling. That sounds like a mouthful. It sounds like it actually is a lot of effort or requires a lot of skill. But trust me, it's super simple and it's actually very effective. And it's been very effective for me when I have actually used it. And what it basically is that every time you switch your focus, you write down the time and what you were doing in the last little segment of time. So if you can imagine, you start your day at 8 a.m. and you write down, all right, 8 a.m. started my day. And then 8:30, when you realize that you switched your focus and you started doing something else, you write down 8:30 and then you write down what you have been doing for those last 30 minutes. And I think that this is actually a really simple but profound way to keep focused, because it might seem a little counterintuitive, but when you reflect on what you've been doing, it keeps you on track. Anytime you start to switch your focus, all you have to do for this method to work is realize when you're switching your focus, and then that's it. Because when you realize you're switching your focus, and you have to interstitial journal, you have to write it down, there's that little moment of clarity and accountability when you realize, oh, if I actually do go and do this other thing that I'm thinking about right now, I have to log it in my interstitial journal. And a lot of times that's all it takes to really consider, is this worth switching my focus? Is this worth stopping what I'm currently doing and going to the next thing? Because a lot of times, let's be honest, there's just so many things that you want to get done and they're not exactly bad things, but something might pop up and you just want to tackle it, get it done, so that you can stay focused on what you were working on. But realistically, that gets you out of your deep focus zone. It gets you out of that flow state and you really don't actually get back to what you were doing, at least not very quickly, because it takes so much time to get back into the focus. There's this delay, there's this baggage that you carry anytime you switch your focus. And I think that this is such an excellent way of separating, this is a really key concept that I've been chewing on lately, separating ideation and execution. Ideation is when you have the idea to do something, and the execution is when you actually do it. And if you're like me, you follow a passion, you follow curiosity. Those are great traits to have, to just follow where your mind is curious about where you want to go. It turns work kind of into more of a play session. But we also need to kind of manage that curiosity. We need to manage the places that we might go, or at least plan out and delay some of that gratification, right? So that's where I want to talk about this thing called the interstitial journal. It's a really simple concept. I've built a little model for you in Notion. I'm going to show you how it works. I'm even going to provide a free template so you can find that in the description and be able to download this yourself. And in fact, this is kind of a work in progress, and I think there's a lot of different ways you could use this model, and I could even improve the way it works to make it work for broader things. But for now, it works really great for this interstitial journaling concept, where each day you make a new entry, and then every time you switch your focus, you kind of do a time punch, if that makes sense, and you write down what you've been doing. And so let me know in the comments if you would like to see this used in a different way. I think that there's a lot of different ways we could use this, and I will put in some more effort into kind of optimizing it. But I've got it to a point where it's going to work really well for this interstitial journaling concept. So let's look at the interstitial journal, and I'll show you how it works, and you can take it and use it for yourself. There's not going to be too much breakdown of how this works because, again, like I said, it's really simple. In fact, as I show you this, let's open this up. This is the interstitial journal, and already we're looking at a Notion database, and we've got, the entry and a breakdown of what's happening throughout the day, that punch that I've made it automatic using a formula. But realistically, you don't need Notion for this. And that's what I love, kind of learning about these models and concepts and approaches to productivity that are tool agnostic. And really, this is useful even on pen and paper. You do not have to have Notion, right? You can have a journal, you can keep track of the time, what time it is when you switch your focus, and then write down what you were doing, right? The whole point of these tools that we build, like in Notion, is to make that better, right? We're already doing something that's helpful, or we want to do something that's helpful, and we're building a tool that makes it a little easier. And this does make interstitial journaling easier because once you create the item, I've built this to where it just automatically knows the time, and you can just easily enter a description, and it will automatically tell you how much time has passed between each item that you've done. So when you go back and reflect on how long you've actually spent on tasks, this gives you the ability to see how long you actually spent on a certain task. And we could expand the system even further, make it more complex. I've restrained myself from doing that, but you can imagine that we could set this up to where we could apply some tags to each task at the end of the day, and then we could add up how much time we spent on each of those tasks. And this would be a really solid time management tool without having to pay for some other tool to do it for you. And so, starting from a really simple framework and a really simple foundation, we just have this ability to enter in different punches throughout the day and keep track of our time. And that's the other thing, is that a lot of times I think people will be productive throughout the day, but then at the end of the day, they feel like they weren't as productive as they should have been. There's almost like this guilt, even though they've actually done quite a bit of work. And unless you are keeping track of your time and what you're doing in that time, there's really no way to look at it and see, okay, how did I spend my time throughout the day? I mean, if you want to know how you spent your time in the day and feel good about what you did during the day so that you can stop work and relax, which is really important for a healthy lifestyle, you need to be able to kind of see what you've been doing throughout the day. So we don't want to micromanage what we're doing. We just, in a really useful way, want to keep track of those kind of chunks of things that we're working on. And while we're working on those chunks, it also has the benefit of keeping us away from those distractions, because we know we're going to have to log those distractions, right? There's this really good exercise that I've heard people doing where maybe for a week, every 15 minutes, they're supposed to write down in a chart what they were doing for the last 15 minutes. That's an approach where just every 15 minutes, you can set a timer and you can write down what you're doing. That's perfectly okay too, but this is more of a tailored approach to your day. This is more, flexible. You can stay focused rather than having to write every 15 minutes what you did, but it all accomplishes the same thing. It's to get an account of what we're doing throughout the day, and not only get an account of what we're doing, but keep ourselves accountable. And it kind of encourages us, if we're honest, to be a little bit more productive. And that's a good thing. We want to use these tools to do that. So in this journal, when we open it up, the way this works really simply is that we're going to create a new slot for the day. And I've built this using the sub items in Notion, and I don't want to get too much into the weeds on this one because I want this to be applicable for anybody that wants to make use of this. But if you're familiar with Notion, I'm using sub items, and the reason I'm doing this is so that I need all these pages, all these sub items right here. I need all these entries. I need them to relate to one thing, which they're all relating to this top page for the day, so that I can do this formula for the time in between the tasks. Now, if you are already using some sort of daily page or daily system in your Notion setup, you could forego the sub items and kind of rework the formula just a little bit to where all you have are these entry items, and every day in your page, you just show this linked view and you're able to relate them all to that one day page. But in this case, this is a self-sufficient system. Like I said, there's a lot of ways we can kind of rework this, but I want to start with the basics. All right, so looking at this interstitial journal, we're going to start from scratch, and basically we just make a new entry. And we want to title this with the dynamic title using the @ symbol. And if we type in today and we press enter, that means that it understands that this is today, that this is currently April 11th, but this title @today will actually dynamically change. So when tomorrow comes around and it's then April 12th, this today will change to @yesterday, but Notion again understands what objective date it is. We've got the April 11th, which is the objective date, and then the @today, which is the relative, and that'll change to yesterday, last Wednesday, and so on until it gets so far away that it starts going back to the actual date. But it's a really cool relative way to show the date, and we're putting in @today. There's a way to set this up as a template. I've decided not to because there's currently a bug going on with the way that I built this. Maybe it's resolved, But I'll always make sure that if there is an update to this template, I'll update the link in the description. So definitely check that one out for the latest version of this. But we're gonna use @today, and that's just because we need a title for the entry. And then I just wanna make sure that I toggled this down so that every new item I make is a sub item of this today. And that's what's gonna give us the ability to see the time between each item, because they all belong to this today page. They're all children of it, and I'm using that sub items. So if I press new sub item, that is going to then start kind of cascading this ability to do the interstitial journal. And so as I'm going through today, maybe I started that today. I think the way I would do this is keeping the entry empty, and I would just start writing in the description. And so I might start with, starting my day. It's a late start to the day, but it does understand, the time between this first entry and that today entry. So you don't necessarily have to do that. After 30 minutes, once I'm done recording this video, maybe, I could write, recorded video. And as I move on 30 minutes later and I edited the video, maybe it took 30 minutes, it won't, but edited video, and I was really focused. Obviously these time between they're not gonna be accurate because I'm actively updating this in this video, but you can see how as I'm going throughout my day, I start writing down what I've been doing every time I switch my focus. So here's the key. Every time you switch your focus, you come in and you make a new entry. So now as we go throughout our day, we're gonna be adding new entries, and it's going to know when we punched it, when we added the item. It's fairly simple. And then we're gonna see the time between each item. And I'm just gonna do that throughout my day. And so maybe I add another one, and I got distracted. And so distracted on Instagram. And at the end of the day, I'm going to be able to see a whole list of how I spent my day. Now, you might be asking, well, what happens if I did switch my focus, but I kind of forgot, or it's like a few minutes later, or maybe even 30 minutes later, and I want to log a distraction even though I forgot to log it. And I have that covered in this template. So in case, because this template is using the created time right when you press the new sub item button, it's going to automatically use that as the punch. But just in case you need to actually switch it, what we can do is open up this page, and then we'll see that there's this override property here. So to show you the kind of the back end of how this works, this time entry, this is basically the created time. I can't change this. This is when the page was created. And it's going to default to using that time on this punch. And the way it sorts things, especially the time between, it's going to use that one. However, if you put a time in the override, it's going to use that one instead. So you can see the time entry is 3:15 on today, which is the 11th. And if I go into the 11th and I include a time, and I'd actually do maybe 3:27 p.m. Now you can see that this objective time has changed. So all these formulas are actually built off of the objective time, but the ones that we have going on in the background are the time entry. And so basically, the objective time will read the time entry unless there's an item in override, and then it will use the override. So if override is empty, we're gonna use the time entry, otherwise override. I don't wanna confuse you with formulas. You don't need to know formulas, but all that to say, it will use the created time unless you have something in override, and then it will use that one. And that will affect, the punch time. So it shows us 3:27, and it updated the time between. So when I look here, I now have a more accurate representation of my log. So I've given you the option to override. It takes a little bit of work. I mean, you got to open the page, come down to override. You can move these around if you want and enter the date. And entering times in Notion is not the smoothest. Hopefully that updates as the acquisition of Cron turned into Notion Calendar gets more integrated into the system. But realistically, you probably shouldn't be in the habit of updating these manually anyways. You really want to zone in on anytime you feel and notice that your distraction or your focus has changed. Maybe you've gotten distracted, or maybe you are moving on to another task. You want to get into the habit of anytime that happens, go into the log and log it. Otherwise, you may not get the benefit of having that realization of if you're about to pick up your phone and get on Instagram, knowing that you have to log it, that might prevent you from actually getting on Instagram. So that's a really key part of doing interstitial journaling. So as we fill out the day, we're gonna see this build up, and let me just override this one and actually extend it beyond the hour. So if we go into override and change this to like, 5:20 p.m. So it knows how to translate more than 60 minutes. So you're good there. You're not going to get something like 128 minutes. You'll get an actual readable time. And I've actually built this to go beyond hours into the day, kind of future-proofing it. But I don't think that this is going to be useful beyond the day as an interstitial journal. I think you should create a new day per day, make your log for that day, and then create a new one. So when it comes to tomorrow and I'm going to make a new one, then I would just make a new item right here and start all over by typing in the @today, breaking it down, and then making my sub items. All right, so here's one thing that you need to keep in mind, and this is something that I can't really do anything about. It's just because the way Notion reads things for their formulas, I can't read anything more granular than a minute. And so it really doesn't affect an interstitial journal. You really shouldn't be making new entries more often than a minute. I mean, it should be hopefully, at least more than like 5 minutes, if not 30 minutes or longer. But just because of the way that Notion works, you want to make sure that you do not enter 2 entries that have the same exact time down to the minute. So that's important. Again, I don't want to get into the weeds, but it will break this the formula if that happens. But again, in real use case, you should never do that. You should never have 2 entries. So it's one of those things where as a Notion builder, I want to be able to handle those kind of edge cases, but in reality, you really just shouldn't be in that situation. But if they are the same time, it will break it because if you're a nerd like me and you want to see on the back end why this breaks, it's because I've got these items indexed. Let me show you. I have this formula called index. These numbers are going to increase incrementally based on the time. So they are going to be able to basically be sorted by their time. And in fact, if you want to, you can sort these by index just in case you have something like this. So I overrode this time to be later. Again, this probably isn't going to matter because you're going to be updating this chronologically, but just in case you get something like this where you have them out of order, you can manually reorder these. That's probably actually the way you should do it. You should manually reorder them because as soon as we start adding in a sort, it starts to get a little confusing. It's going to ask you if you want to resort and all that stuff. So I would just keep it to manual. So like I said, this is an MVP. It's a work in progress. Got the concept down. It actually took me a couple days to figure this out. So that's part of the reason why I'm showing you something like this. But I actually really like this concept, and I think this is already in a really useful state. And I would love to actually see how you would use it and let me know how it could be improved, and we can kind of work on it even together. Let me know other use cases for this kind of tracking incrementally. This ability to index items, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 is actually very difficult, and a lot of people want it for different use cases, but you have to, use some somewhat complex formulas if you're not familiar with formulas, and even the time in between. I'm not sure I actually did this the most efficient way, but we got it done, and that's what matters for an MVP. Okay, so just to give you a quick example of what this might actually look like for a normal day. Of course, this is a little idealized with some perfect times, but let's say that this was just an average day, and I started off the day, I created this one at 8 a.m. because that's when I sat at my computer. Whenever you press that button, that's when that punch is going to show. So as soon as I'm done and I'm about ready to switch and move on to something else, I think, okay, I'm going to enter something into my journal. And so I asked myself, what did I do for the last, looks like about 30 minutes? I create the new item and I type in answered emails, and it knows when I created it at 8:27. And so it knows, okay, I spent 27 minutes answering emails, and I move on to the next thing. I start working. I don't know how long I'm going to work on it. You might be able to plan on when you're going to work on things and how long. I think that's a different side of time management. Totally legit. You can totally do that. This is not planning. This is more tracking and accountability. It's what did you actually do, not what you planned on doing. So those two could actually marry really well, and maybe we'll tackle that in another video on how you can actually do both. But in this case, we're just kind kind of keeping track of what we actually did and what we actually spent our time on. So I may know somewhere else, okay, I want to spend about an hour and a half on Notion formulas. Maybe I actually planned on only spending an hour, but that's not what really matters for this. What I actually want to know is how much time did I actually spend doing it? So I got done with my emails. I entered this journal. I started working on a Notion formula. And once I'm done with that and I'm about ready for my meeting with Jim, I am going to enter another item in there and I'm going to type in worked on Notion formula. And again, it's going to know exactly how much time I spent on that, and I'll move on to the next thing. So you can see just an average day, working through it. We've got a meeting and a coffee break. I am honest, I got distracted on Instagram, and then I worked on a presentation for next week. Here's the thing, distracted on Instagram. I now see I did it, and maybe I had temptations to get on Instagram earlier, and I decided not to do it because I knew I would have to write it down. But maybe during my coffee break, I got on Instagram, and then all of a sudden, 15 minutes later, all right, I probably need to log this. It's not really my coffee break, and I want to be honest about it so that I can actually improve and know where I'm at throughout the day. And so I put in distracted on Instagram, and it shows 15 minutes. So this is really important. It's not that you have to feel guilty about it, but it's just, okay, what did I actually spend my time on, and how did I, how productive was I? And so I've got this in for 15 minutes. And so now I know that I did that. And later on in the day, I might actually realize, okay, I have that in my journal. Maybe for the rest of the day, I don't actually do it again because I know it's already in my journal that I got distracted once, and it actually helps me to not do it again. I think, okay, yeah, once is fine. I got on Instagram, that's totally fine, but I don't need to do it again. And I definitely don't need to do it 5 times a day or, however often it feels like I need that quick little distraction whenever my work gets tough. We want to have that ability to kind of get past that. And it's usually a small little hill of willpower to just not pick up your phone and not get distracted. But oftentimes it's just too easy to do it. And so this is a great way to just, all right, I know I'm gonna have to write it. Let's just not do it for now. Maybe I'll do it later. And I think it's actually super helpful. And I've actually experienced it doing this interstitial journaling practice. And so then, we went to lunch, and then we had a chat. We answered more emails, got into some video editing. We watched YouTube videos on editing, which is, I think, productive. But then maybe while we're on YouTube, we got distracted watching Ryan Trahan. Totally possible. And we did some emails and planned for tomorrow. So your day might look a little different than this. It's definitely going to look a lot more jagged. It's not going to be perfect 15-minute intervals. You may have a lot more actually. And when I did it, I had maybe more than this, and certainly not these perfect times. And absolutely do not feel like you have to override a time to make it this perfect 15-minute intervals or whatever. The meeting with Jim, it's like starting at exactly 11. But that's just not life. That's not what happens, right? So we want to keep track of what actually happens. And what really matters is that threshold, that transition moment when you switch, you stop doing one thing and you move on to the next thing. That's all we want to log. And once we do that, we actually generate this really accurate picture of our day. And it's really helpful for staying productive, for analyzing and improving. We all want to improve, I think. If you're watching this video, you certainly want to improve. And so I would like to recommend this as an option for you to try. I think if you even try this for a week, you don't even have to use Notion. You can do it on a piece of paper with a pen. That's where it all started. But if you are kind of a Notion nerd and you want to try it, you can definitely try the template that I'll leave a link in the description for. But just try this practice and feel if it actually is helping. I would even recommend just starting with paper, and you don't have to get into this. You don't have to get distracted, building this Notion template or downloading it and figuring out how it works, even though it's really simple. Just start on paper, and I think even a day, you'll realize, okay, this is actually changing my outlook. It's making me more perceptive. It's making me reflect more actively on my day and keeping me on task. And I would submit that if you try that, it's actually going to be super beneficial. So don't even have to use Notion. Start and try on paper. And then when you realize that you want to keep doing this, feel free to use this template and go from there. And let me know how you're using it and how you think this could be improved. And I think this is only the version 1 of where this could go. So hope that's helpful for you, and I hope you try it and let me know what you think and how it has helped you. And if it hasn't, then I'm sorry. Maybe the next video will be more helpful for you. But until then, We'll see you in the next video. Hope you enjoy this interstitial journaling.